Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to the PAC's webinar on China's Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, Lessons for the Philippines. My name is E.G. Dizon, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Okay, so before we begin our webinar, I would like to set a few ground rules. First of all, if you notice, all cameras or mics are currently disabled to allow ourselves, of course, to focus on our speakers' presentations. Second, while the chat box is currently disabled, we will be using it later for the open forum. And once enabled, please make sure to include your name and your affiliation when asking your questions. So our webinar for today focuses on Africa's experience with China's Belt and Road Initiative. This topic is particularly interesting since Africa is one of the regions that China has been heavily investing in, especially in recent years. Learning from the African experiences with the BRI can help us hopefully better understand how to improve our approach with regards to engaging China. So we are honored here today by an esteemed panel um, who will share with us their thoughts and their perspective with regard to this matter. So our first speaker is a graduate of the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Alessa Lopez has a master's degree in international affairs with a focus on international security policy. In the past, she has worked with the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund, and also as a graduate consultant with the Rhodium Group, a non-resident research intern in the Hudson Institute Center for Political and Military Analysis. And she recently worked as an instructional designer for ThinkTown Incorporated. So friends, let us all give a virtual round of applause and welcome to Ms. Alessandra Lopez. Alessa, you may take the floor.
Thank you so much, EG, for your very kind introduction. If I may, I will be sharing my screen. Can you see my screen, EG?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning again, and thank you to EG for your very warm welcome and introduction. I'd like to thank and acknowledge Dr. Ramel Banlawi and give my heartfelt appreciation to PAX for allowing me to share my research on China's BRI in Africa, best practices for the Philippines. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. DUANGYONG, my co-panelist and director of the Center for China's Overseas Studies, and also our reactor, Dr. Robin Michael Garcia of WRN Research. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to preface it by crediting my peers at Columbia University who toiled relentlessly to complete research on Chinese BRI infrastructure investment in Africa. Nora, Inshul, Chenzi, Emma, and Rocky. A lot of the research that we have conducted together has been incorporated into the presentation that I will be showing today. So a little bit of background about China's BRI policy. The BRI is China's signature $1 trillion infrastructure investment program. Unveiled in 2013 by President Xi Jinping, this massive infrastructure project aims to connect continental Europe to Asia to Africa in an attempt to revive or reconnect the old maritime and silk routes. These are the land and trade routes. The BRI presents a unique opportunity for African markets. A research paper, which was entitled Leveraging BRI for Africa's Industrialization, identified a funding gap of approximately 68 to $108 billion, which was required to meet Africa's infrastructure financing needs. Therefore, you could see the BRI could provide a window of opportunity to fill this said infrastructure financing gap, further enhancing trade and connectivity in the region. Okay, so what is the problem statement that I am trying to convey in my research? Rail networks actually are an integral part of the land component of the BRI initiative. So as I mentioned here in this PowerPoint, railways do serve as a fundamental vein of economic activity with the potential to stimulate integrate and disparate market segments. However, without adequate institutional, commercial, and political support, a growing class of BRI financed railways may fall short of developmental expectations. This is a select list of BRI financed railway projects, albeit not comprehensive. And here we can draw a lot of comparisons to the Clark-Subic railway project, which I will be talking about in my presentation later. A lot of comparisons can be drawn between the Clark-Subic railway and the BRI funded projects in Africa. So as you can see in the third line, this is the Addis Ababa Standard Gauge Railway connecting Ethiopia to Nigeria. This is an example of an already completed BRI financed railway. Meanwhile, on the second row, you could see the Lagos-Kano Standard Gauge Railway. This is a segment, so the Lagos-Ibadan Railway is a segment of the Lagos-Kano line in Nigeria. This is an example of a very nascent railway that was just completed and operational beginning, I believe, earlier this year in January 2021. So both railways were chosen because of their similarities to the Clark-Subic proposed railway. Okay, so firstly, each railway connects ports with inland industrial bases, which means that it can alleviate and streamline the import and export of goods and services. Secondly, all of these railways presented in this PowerPoint are examples of standard gauge railways. What does this mean? It means that it's 4 feet and 8.5 inches, delivering freight materials. And lastly, each of these cases were built to increase transport capacity along the rail line, and in some cases, replace the existing or aging rail infrastructure that were built during the colonial times. So the fiscal sustainability of each of the railways that I will discuss will depend directly upon the extent of associated economic diversification and transport efficiency gains of both railways. So economic growth in much of the continent of Africa is described by the export of one single commodity. And in the case of Nigeria, this is oil, where approximately 92% of Nigeria's exports are oil. And this presents a huge problem because the reliance on a single commodity, such as oil, reflects how highly volatile prices of global oil affect Nigerian economic growth. So in essence, this results in Nigerian economic growth being tightly coupled to potentially volatile global oil prices, as depicted in the graph right here. So while Nigeria anticipates tremendous windfall gains during price booms, it also experiences very sharp pitfalls during price drops. So here are 2 of our Tearline articles, which we conducted research. So our research really focuses on China's BRI in Africa, in Nigeria more particularly, and the impact of the Lagos-Ibadan railway to the regional economy. So we were able to benchmark or compare and contrast this case with the Addis Ababa Djibouti railway, which connects the capital of Ethiopia, which is Addis Ababa, to the port of Djibouti. In our second Tearline article, we looked at a new rail extension at the Apapa freight terminus, and we tried to determine whether this rail extension is able to provide efficiency gains, further allowing Nigeria to be able to diversify its economy and its economic exports, because Nigeria is currently reliant on a single commodity, like I mentioned earlier, which is oil. Okay, so the Lagos-Ibadan Standard Gauge Railway, this is depicted in the picture right here. It's a 157-kilometer railway connecting Nigeria's port city of Lagos to Ibadan near the border. This is financed by a loan of 1.3 billion US dollars from China's Export-Import Bank, as well as a co-financing with the Nigerian government, and the Nigerian government put in $182 million. I'm not sure if you can see it in this photo, but this corridor is really significant because it connects the commercial part of Lagos to the rest of the country. So to talk a little bit more about our first Terraline article and the conclusions, this will be very, very brief. Our first Terraline looked at the potential upstream economic effects or economic diversification brought by a standard gauge railway. We were able to conclude as a group that the Lagos-Ibadan Railway fell short of generating positive developmental impacts for Nigeria's economy. And why may this be? Number one, Nigeria lacked significant infrastructure between existing industrial bases and the current rail line. And then number two, there were no plans as of 2020, late 2020, to connect the railway to key manufacturing plants. And number three, the proposed dry ports construction has not yet commenced. And we were able to deduce all of these three conclusions by looking at geospatial intelligence imagery, or these are just examples or fancy ways of saying Google Earth Pro, ArcGIS, Digital Globe. Our second Terraline article, on the other hand, looked at a rail extension, which was a newly built rail extension, which aimed to connect Nigeria's hinterland to global markets. The current Apapa freight terminus failed to address critical port congestion at the surrounding Tin Can Island. The Tin Can Island is outlined to the lower left, therefore casting doubt about the utility of the freight extension to support diversified economic infrastructure at Tin Can Island. So what can we learn from this? This ultimately calls to question the potential developmental impacts and positive economic growth, which was supposedly generated by a BRI financed railway. Okay, so what I just described earlier was a railway in its early stages, for which it was too early to tell whether said BRI finance project reaped positive benefits for locals' economy of Nigeria. So while the Lagos-Ibadan Railway is an example depicting the additional need for infrastructure connectivity between railways and industrial bases, and secondly, bottlenecks surrounding port congestion and last mile connectivity. This next example, which I will be depicting or which I will be showing you guys, is an example of a positive effect of BRI finance project. So this is the Addis Ababa standard gauge railway. This is a 752-kilometer long line, providing connection between landlocked Addis Ababa to Ethiopia in the port of Dorale in Djibouti. This will cut travel time, or is expected to cut travel time from 3 days to 12 hours by passenger train. And it is also important because freight deliveries along this line accounts for 95% of Ethiopia's trade, and it passes through the port of Djibouti. So this is why the line is quite significant. So after the railway was built, here is an example of positive economic spillover. To your left is what before, and to your right is a picture right after the railway was built. This geospatial imagery depicts the increase in transport capacity along the vicinity of the Addis Ababa line. Shortly after the construction of the Adama rail station to your right, we were able to see the Adama Industrial Park emerged. The Adama Industrial Park now houses Chinese manufacturing firms and is projected to create approximately 25,000 jobs for locals. And so the success of the Adama Industrial Park showcases that BRI investment has the potential to create positive developmental impacts by connecting fragmented industrial bases to a rail line. So here is a snapshot of BRI in the Philippines. The current administration, President Rodrigo Duterte's Build, Build, Build program coincides with China's BRI because China pledged a total of 24 billion in investments and MOUs in the areas of economics, trade, and infrastructure. And so this partnership really describes the complex interdependence of both countries and their reliance on one another. So the Philippines and China signed a six-year agreement to implement 15 big ticket infrastructure projects, including the very notable project, which was the Chico River Pump Irrigation Project, benefiting 4,000 families and irrigating 7,000 plus hectares in Tuao, Piat, Cagayan, and even Kalinga. So China provided $24 billion worth of loans for infrastructure investment, including 13 government-to-government agreements, along with what many have deemed to be President Rodrigo Duterte's current administration's pivot to China, or what they call an independent foreign policy. So, overshot. Okay. So looking east really has the potential to bring tremendous opportunity in the context of BRI financing. The Subic to Clark Railway, which is a current project that is proposed, is a railway of 71 kilometers connecting Subic Freeport Zone to Clark International Airport. It is also going to be a freight railway in Luzon, which will link the country's current North Railway project. It is the highest funded government-to-government project between two countries, estimated at around 940 million US dollars. The Chinese embassy also mentioned that once this railway was completed, it will be able to build a resilient linkage between ports, railways, and airports along the Subic to Clark corridor, which will improve logistic efficiency, trim transportation costs, and support potential demand for freight services and economic activities along the line. What's also interesting about this railway is that there are plans in the future to connect to a new Clark City. This is a new planned economic development promising to house 1.2 million people, providing a direct link from Subic Port to New Clark City, therefore alleviating congestion caused by incoming traffic or ports or imports that would have otherwise been delivered via trucks through Manila. The building of the said line will also strengthen intermodal transport and has the potential to lessen traffic along the Subic to Clark Expressway, as this proposed line runs parallel to the Subic-Clark Expressway. And so this rail line does really have the potential to alleviate a lot of port congestion in Manila. As Clark grows in size, it is important to send import and exports directly through Subic instead of routing it via Manila. It will really help our traffic situation. With that said, we have learned a lot of lessons from the BRI investment case in Africa. That development financing is not always a measure or guarantee of success. Rather, positive developmental impacts in the local economies of aid recipient countries should be realized in conjunction with institutional, political, and commercial support by the local government of the aforementioned countries. Okay, so what are some of the best practices that can be applied to the Philippines? What are some of the lessons that we've learned from the two cases of BRI investment projects in Africa? Okay, so looking at economic development and diversification, as we've seen with the Addis Ababa Railway, the Adama Industrial Park was created directly after the rail line was built. While it is too early to tell for this Subic-Clark corridor, this offers the potential for upstream economic development along the line. However, in stark contrast, the Lagos-Ibadan Railway was short of providing Nigeria's local economy to veer away from its export of one single commodity. This can definitely be attributed to the losses with traffic delays, which impede economic growth and diversification. It's also important to note that long haul and last mile connectivity between the Apapa Freight Terminus and Tin Can Island are necessary to reduce costs for both importing and exporting parties. So the US Institute of Peace recently published a special report on railways, and they cited the intrinsic advantage of rail lines in their economies of scale, as railways, and I quote, need less frequent maintenance, making them a low-cost option for freight traffic and offering what is cited as a huge potential for trade promotion. So to be able to conclude today, BRI financing does serve as an opportunistic window. However, the success of projects are not intrinsically ensured. There is tremendous and huge opportunity for the Subic to Clark Railway. However, this must also be supported by strong implementation in the part of the local government and the current capacity of the contractors who are bidding for this project. And this is where my presentation ends. I am happy to pass it on to my co-panelist, Dr. Wang Duangyong. 谢谢你们听我的口头报告. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Alessa.
Okay, go.
So now we move to our second speaker, Dr. Wang Duangyong. Is an associate professor at the Shanghai International Studies University and the director of the Center for China's Overseas Interest Studies. Dr. Wang received his PhD in economics from Wuhan University and has served in different enterprises, universities, and think tanks for more than 20 years. In the past 10 years, his research interest has focused on Chinese outward investment and infrastructure projects in Africa. For this topic, up to now, Dr. Wang has conducted a series of fieldworks in more than 10 African countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, Kenya, Egypt, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Djibouti, among others. So friends, let us all give a virtual round of applause and welcome to Dr. Wang Duangyong.
Okay, thank you so much.
Wang.
Okay, it's time for me now.
Yes, Dr. Wang.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you for my colleagues in Philippines, but it's my great honor to be here to presented my some the field work experience in Africa as Mr. Didan just said, but I in the past 10 years and I conduct a series of field work in at least 10 African countries, but I'm very glad to share my experience here. Okay, please see my presentation. Okay, but now I close my video. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, actually, just for this, I know the title is so-called the license for Philippines, but actually, I have no no enough knowledge on the Philippines, but I don't know how to say. But I'm very glad to share my finding in the Africa. Just now at first to introduce a very brief background, so-called China-Africa economic relations. But I know many people always think there is a very huge economic interest for China in Africa. But please see. We can say in the past 20 years, actually the trade between China and Africa has a very high growth, the growth rate. So until now, as you know, China is the biggest trade partner for Africa. Please see that for even in the last year, the trade value between China and Africa is about $118.7 billion. It's indeed we can say it's huge, but for China, please see, actually, the trade value between China and Africa, it just account for about 4% of China foreign trade. So we can say maybe China is very important to Africa, but unfortunately, in trade, Africa is not so important to China. And please notice, these two pictures is very important for us. Please notice, actually, the biggest trade partner for China is Asia, especially Japan, Korea, and Asia. I mean the Southeast Asia. Please notice this. Actually, about 56% China imported from Asia, and a majority is from Southeast Asia. But please always remind, the biggest trade partner of China is the USA, West Europe, and Asia, especially Southeast Asia. Please notice. So I know always some institution always say China has a very huge investment in Africa. For example, the Johns Hopkins, they always provide the database for this. But unfortunately, just for the Chinese official database, not this. Please notice, actually, currently, China's outward FDI to Africa is accounted for about China total FDI about here. Only 2%. And please notice, actually Chinese FDI, a majority of it into Asia, especially Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. But this is very important. This project, this item account Chinese interests in Africa. It's so-called Chinese overseas contractor projects. Please notice, the biggest share is in Asia, but the second is Africa. It means although China has a very little trade and investment in Africa, but China has a very big interest on the infrastructure contractor in Africa. And this is for the value of turnover. This for personal number. And the first one always in Asia. Second, Africa. This same. The first one, the first Asia. The second Africa. Oh, this is very interesting. Just for China, we can see in the past 20 years, China, all of overseas contractor share like this. First one, Asia and Oceania, especially Southeast Asia. The second, Africa. But just in the recent years, and Asia is the biggest one, and Africa the second one. Please notice. Just if from the angle of Africa, we can see this, and you can see. We can say 20 years ago, USA very huge, very big share in the Africa contractor market. At that time, USA has about the 1/4, but now is only 4%. 20 years ago, China in Africa, in African international contract market, only 7.4%, but now 62%. So it means although China very little trade and investment in Africa, but the contract, especially infrastructure project construction, is very important to China and to Africa. But we can say now, currently, China is the biggest and the most important the workers in Africa, construction workers. But I always, but we know all of you notice the so-called BRI, but please notice this document, the official, the Chinese official document. But actually, please notice, 4 years ago, China State Council published this document. Actually, Chinese government encourage Chinese companies investment abroad. The first one, infrastructure, not financing. Okay, continue. And we know many people always notice always like to mention that China and Africa, but maybe you think that Africa is very important in BRI, but actually it's not true. You know, BRI was put forward in the 2013, but the first African country in BRI is by the end of the 2015. At that time, the BRI has about 60 countries, but the first African country is just in 6 years ago, 5 years ago. And only 2 years ago, about just in the Beijing summit of FOCAC, is about we can say the Africa countries join us BRI group, about the 28 African countries. Until now, there are 46 African countries in BRI, and only 8 African countries not in BRI. You can see it's not so big country. We can see this date. Just in the map, we can say all of the African countries join the BRI, but please notice, these 46 African countries, only one high-income country, and 6 upper middle, and lower, the 21 lower middle, and the low income is 18. It means most of African country in BRI is so-called the undeveloped country. But these African countries, and actually we can see they have a very huge potential. This 46 African country, we can see very huge population and very big land areas. And this is the share in the world. And you count about the 1/6 and in the world, and just the land about the 21%. But please notice, just in the economic indicator, in GDP, only less than 3%. Export, only 2.3. FDI, very, very, very little. This 46 African country with China, we can say, even in the total, just in Africa, all of this 46 African countries, we can say is equals to the almost the whole of Africa. But in China, for China total international relation is very little. For example, it's export and FDI. And just in the international projects, it's very big. We know BRI, they have the 5 priority. But by this standard, we can see Africa country. You can see this map. It's areas. We can see the density, density of the areas global. Africa is very big. It's a sea routes density of the world. Africa is very big, and even the port, Africa is only 5%. And by roads density, we can say it's a very little the road in Africa. So we can say, if for BRI, it's not for trade, but promoting trade between China and Africa. It's not for promote Chinese investment in Africa, but because maybe Africa needs the trade and need investment, but the critical point for Africa, for the African development, it always needed. The priority is the infrastructure and the industrialization. No, this is for BRI. We can see these 2 case studies. I guess maybe someone knows this, the minerals for infrastructure. But this deal was signed by the 2029. At that time, it was called the biggest contract in the history of Africa. But DR Congo is a very huge country. We can say now it's the second largest country in the world, but it's very poor and very weak the government budget. But we know DR Congo experienced about the 20 years civil war, and the former President Kabila initiated this reconstruction project for the country infrastructure, for example. But the biggest point, the problem for the DR Congo is no fund, no money. How to get an investment? Fortunately, Congo is very rich on natural resource. So 10 years ago, the DR Congo government with signed a contract with the Chinese consortium. We can see, but actually this mineral for infrastructure deal, including the 2 parts. One part is infrastructure part. It means that DR Congo need this infrastructure project about railway, road, airports, university, hospital, and school, but how to get funding. And it means that the DR Congo government permit Chinese companies to do exploring the mining. And this also the investment from Chinese companies. And for this project, there is the joint venture, and the biggest shareholder is CREC and the Power China. And for this project, I conducted the 2 field work in DR Congo. First one is 10 years ago. The second is 2016. And okay, we draw this map. This map may be a little sophisticated. It means the owner, beneficial owner, is the DRC government, and the Chinese contractor signed a contract with government, and just for the infrastructure project, the government, the DR Congo government can get funding from the Chinese Exim Bank. It means this, provide the buyer's credit, and the government showed private this loan to Chinese companies. And the first one, the mining project is a joint venture. And this government, the government permit this this joint venture to explore the mining, and this joint venture will provide the revenue from the mining joint venture for the mining project. And actually, it's I guess maybe many people always know the so-called the Angola model, but it's quite different with Angola model. We call it the Congo model. Why we have this the big slash? It means actually the Exim Bank not directly provide the credit to the government, the DR Congo government. The Exim Bank actually provides the bar credit to Chinese companies. Chinese companies build infrastructure project, and how to repay the loan just for the mining project. It means actually the loan is was not directly into the DR Congo government the finance base, but its benefits is to avoid the very serious corruption in Africa. It means DR Congo government was necessary to take a very huge debt. For this point, so-called debt crisis or the so-called debt trap, and actually didn't exit. Okay, the most interesting point is, sorry, but it's 20 minutes, but we will speed up. Okay. For this project, we noticed that actually Chinese consumer seemingly pay more attention to infrastructure, not to focus mining parts. And the most important, the biggest risk is financial risk. But this financial crisis is only for Chinese consortium. Actually, but it means the loan will be provided to Chinese consortium, not to DR Congo government. So if we can say the debt crisis is just for Chinese companies, not for African government. Unfortunately, after this first field work, this project and seems to some trouble. But 5 years later, when I return to the project, we see the situation was quite different. This picture I took in the first field work, 2011. The lower picture I took in the second field work, the 2016. Please compare. And the road and this bridge, and this new road and the new bridge. And even for this project, actually, it means that this project got succeed, but there was some trouble for the project. But just in the process, and it got solved. Actually, we can see Chinese companies always provide very important, very good infrastructure projects in Africa. For example, this is a project in the Lamu Island of Kenya, and I took this picture in 2014. And I took this picture when I visited this site in the I took the picture on site on the 1915. But now in 2018 is a new huge port under construction. But you always can see China, anyway, African countries always get the project from China companies. So, as you know, although Chinese the bank always provide credit to the local government and the local of every country. But most of the loan always undertaken by Chinese companies. So if we can say there is the debt crisis, and actually this crisis is just to Chinese bank and Chinese companies, and not for Africa countries. Okay, sorry, it's a case study too. We promote it's a new the very huge the project in Egypt. Is also by CIS. And we can say anyway. Also, the Chinese companies signed the contract with the Egypt government, but this project is not so smoothly. And so it means actually Egyptian the enterprises Egyptian wish to cancel this contract because Egyptian army wished to take this project, but finally the Egyptian contractor has no ability to take this project, and I conduct the field work 2 years ago, and I took this picture. But in this field, I do worker for 2 weeks. And anyway, just for this case study, we can see how to match the supply and the demand between China and every country. Africa always need cash, and China companies always need to get in construction and to keep the Chinese contractor. So, but the key obstacle for BRI in every country of the, I guess maybe there's some problem. First one is nationalism, but the second is the administrative efficiency, and the third is the potential implementation. But the so-called Philippines, sorry, I have no idea on Philippines. But I guess the situation is quite different. I can provide a very important information. Just for the first quarter of this year, you know, China's the biggest trade partner is Asia, not USA, not Europe, not Japan. But it means, don't worry, Asia and especially Asia is always a very important economic partner with China. Please notice, is Air China, is the air routes. Please notice very few to Africa, especially to focus the Asia. China Eastern, same. Southern airline, same. And so, if we can talk about the license for Philippines, we can review Philippines. How is the situation of the infrastructure, and the Philippines, how much investment from for the development, and you can the most important, you can think over the trade with China. So I never think we can get any license from BRI in China, in Africa to Philippines. Anyway, thank you so much. I took too much time. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Wang. Wait. Hey, Dr. Wang, if you could exit your screen share, please.
Sorry. What do you need?
Can you exit the sharing so that we could have the normal view? Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Let me check. Did you see it? Did you get it?
Sorry.
No?
Wait. No. I'll just.
Oh, okay. I don't know why.
There, I can control it here.
Oh.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang.
Yeah, it's okay. You can see now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
Dr.
good.
Wang.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
So So thank you, Dr. Wang, and of course, and thank you to our two speakers, Ms. Alessa Lopez and Dr. Wang, for those very insightful presentations. So before we move to our reactor, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Jeffrey Nang. He is the president of the Association for Philippine-China Understanding. Okay. Um, Okay, so with that, we move to our reactor for today's webinar. So let me introduce Dr. Robin Michael U. Garcia. He is a Shanghai-educated political scientist and academic and the CEO of WRN Research. He is currently an assistant professor at the Political Economy program of the School of Governance of the University of Asia and the Pacific. He has written on different topics that lie at the intersection of political psychology, international political economy, and international relations theory applied to Southeast Asia, and of course, the Philippines and China. Professor Garcia also lectured on development theory, political economy, public policy, and international relations at the De La Salle University in Manila and at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has also been invited to deliver keynote addresses in different venues such as the British Chamber of Commerce Myanmar, the Mongolian Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Consular Corps of the Philippines, the Rotary Club of Makati West, doing business in Asia Alliance annual meetings, as well as in UP Diliman, um, in the Ateneo de Manila University, and in the Department of Interior and Local Government, Peace Summit, among others. And aside from that, of course, he has also been interviewed multiple times in different media outlets, including but not limited to Rappler, CNN, Bloomberg Mongolia, the South China Morning Post, and the Business World, to mention a few. Dr. Garcia obtained his Doctor of Philosophy in Politics and International Relations degree from the School of International Relations and Public Affairs of Fudan University in Shanghai, where he was distinguished with the Dean's Award for Academic Excellence in 2017. He holds a Master of Public Administration major in Public Policy from the University of the Philippines and a Bachelor of Arts in Development Studies from De La Salle University. And so with that, let us all give Dr. Garcia a virtual round of applause and, of course, a welcome. Robin, you may take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, EG, for that very extensive introduction. I apologize that that was really long. I should have just kept it in maybe a few sentences. But I'm very happy to be here. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to the Philippine Association for China Studies for, of course, the wonderful job of doing very informative webinar series. And of course, this is the latest addition to that series. It's very, of course, Africa is so important to look at because that's sort of one of the most important case studies in the Belt and Road Initiative. I would like to thank, it's nice to see, of course, familiar faces and the invitation from Dr. Romel Banlawi. I can see Dr. Tina Clemente here and a couple of others who we worked with before. I'd like to thank the speakers, Dr. Wang and Alessandra Lopez, for those discussions and for those presentations. That was really nuanced and I really enjoyed it a lot. So what I'll do today is really just simply synthesize what has been talked about, and then I'll add a few of my thoughts regarding the issue of the Belt and Road Initiative as applied to the Philippines. If you notice the two speakers, they differ as well as they are similar in maybe two ways. So they're similar in pointing out the economic gaps in receiver countries, and also they both speakers were able to highlight the considerations of the domestic sphere, which is nationalism, politics, the economic structure of the domestic context of these receiver countries. But at the same time, they differ, I think, from different perspectives. So the first speaker really talked about the receiver side or the domestic context in Africa. And I think that was an important discussion especially when we try to draw lessons for the Philippines. However, the second speaker talked about more of the China side. So I think that maybe the two discussions really were very important in discussing the Belt and Road Initiative, looking at what happens in the countries who receive the the help from China, as well as what are the motivations of China in that regard. So for instance, let me just move on to the first maybe difference on the uh, on the receiver side. So Ms. Alessandra talked about the bid for economic diversification among the BRI receiver countries. However, the case studies were very insightful. Nigeria and Ethiopia, had differing economic impact. It's not all bad, as was pointed out. Nigeria had perhaps because it did not create significant economic impact because of some maybe domestic considerations, including particularly the economic structure. So I believe that could be an important jump-off point to the discussion, really an appraisal and assessment of how the Philippines will fare with the sort of the investments that come in, and how what are the things that are important to consider, specifically the economic structure of the Philippines when we receive economic benefits from China. I feel that was an important point, and there were a couple of things there. One is maybe the need for industrial bases, sort of, and the need for other types of economic structures. But on the Ethiopia side, I think what was highlighted was the increase in jobs, as well as the how it connects fragmented uh, industrial operations in different areas. So so I feel that looking at what happens in the Philippines and how we assess the BRI in the Philippines, we have to look at the domestic economic structure and whether or not we're ready for that kind of investment. So that was a very important point, I guess, that was shared to us by Alessa. But on the China side, I really appreciated the comparative perspective of Chinese investments with Africa from a broader level and with Asia, and sort of the risks that the Chinese investors are facing, whether or not they be private companies or state-owned corporations. But maybe we could nuance the discussion, try to differentiate whether the investments are coming from SOEs or maybe the private sector of China. But I feel the case study on the financial risks that these Chinese investments are beset with when they invested in Africa was a crucial discussion as well. Um, but I want to add to the discussion, perhaps. I mean, there are many lenses with which we can analyze the Belt and Road Initiative in many different places. Maybe I could just mention three considerations, but I really come from the perspective of international politics. Um, so I think the first thing that I want to say is, maybe aside from what the BRI is and what is the impact on countries, as what was discussed today, another issue perhaps that we can tackle is to maybe ask, why is China doing the BRI? And therefore, we have to push the causal chain back, perhaps to a more fundamental question, which is, what is the BRI and the grand strategy of China? And in answering this question, and this is the research that I'm developing, I use the lens of reassurance, costly signaling, and broadly cooperation building of China among, maybe as it takes its place in the leadership role in the world, it's trying to create, build cooperative relations with other countries. And I feel that that's an important part of really looking at what China is doing. So I guess when we're talking about reassurance, or China's bid to reassure other countries of its benign intentions, we have to look at the political psychology of elites, how it's being received. Is there a China threat in those countries? And how how is it being received by the public, right? And of course, as I said, this is an effort of China to communicate benign intentions and build trust, right? So BRI might be analyzed in that way. So that's the first. But as I said, the second thing I want to say, any reassurance attempt is relational in the sense that it's not just based on what China is doing, or what the proponent is doing, but it's also based on the acceptance of the receiver. And we've seen, as all the case studies have talked about today, the acceptance of the BRI, at least perceptually, is different. And you can see that in the Philippines as well. But when you zero in on the type of acceptance, the level and the extent of acceptance of BRI, and the acceptance of reassurance attempt of China to communicate benign intentions, there are many considerations. You might talk about public opinion and mass sentiments. You might talk about the strength and persuasiveness of the opposition in domestic contexts, the size and the strength of epistemic communities sort of trying to push for or against a certain type of project or a certain type of alliance. You may also want to see the official public diplomacy of China in many different countries. So you can see, in fact, in the Philippines, there was the Isang Dagat video, and that was cast in the context of the South China Sea disputes. So is the reassurance attempt of China effective in that sense? Is it seen as duplicitous, or is it seen as superficial? Because while there are investments coming in, you could see China doing other things that not a lot of people agree with. So how is China selling the idea of BRI in domestic context is crucial as well in convincing the population and convincing political elites. And of course, when you talk about political elites, you might want to look at the political structure, the composition of the Senate, or the composition of the House of Representatives, the composition of the cabinet. All of these things matter because of intra-elite and inter-elite sort of competition or cooperation. But more importantly, I feel that for the context of this discussion, in countries where elections is going to happen very, very soon, such as the Philippines, the BRI and this whole Philippine-China relations, or maybe Africa-China relations in other countries, will be appraised because of the intensity of the China's effort to sort of engage with other countries in the world. So it's quite new for many countries. A lot of the leaders are older leaders, so they're used to the United States and maybe even for post-communist countries. Well, of course, China is there, but also Russia and Japan. The third thing I want to point out is the credibility of reassurance. So any type of reassurance attempt from other countries to build cooperation has to be credible. And I think that's one of the most understudied areas of international politics. And many scholars all over the world will agree. How is it seen as credible, right? So credibility is both the credibility of threat, in the sense that when a country says, okay, I'm going to attack you if you do certain X things. And that's in fact why the issue of credibility of the United States alliance with the Philippines is cast in that discussion. So credibility is important in threats and in alliances. But credibility in promises is another area of discussion. And if we're going to assess whether or not the ability of China to build trust and cooperation in the Philippines from a credibility perspective, I think the conclusion that we may draw is that I think China could do a better job in sort of creating credibility for its promises and all of these things. So I come from the perspective of political psychology, of how elites make decisions, how elites perceive certain issues and areas. This is a huge area of research in international relations. Even in the 1970s, this was by of course Robert Jervis and all these scholars who focus on how elites perceive each other, how elites perceive other countries, as well as how public opinion may in fact be important in foreign policy decision making and in alliances and in all of these areas. So I think, for just to wrap up um, my role here is to maybe focus on the fact of what the other speakers said, which is really the two sides, the China side and the risks that might be accrued from dealing with other countries, such as in Africa, and from the receiver side, which is varied economic impact, I guess, from the Belt and Road Initiative. And what I did was to extend that discussion and really talk about perceptions and bring the discussion back, not just to economics, but also to political science. Um, all right, so that's it for me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to react to these wonderful speakers. A very nuanced discussion, I feel. It's one of the best discussions and most nuanced discussions I've had in regarding the Belt and Road Initiative. Congratulations to PAC, and thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Robin, for your response and your reaction to our speakers. Um, there. So with that, I guess we are now moving to the open forum of our webinar. So if you'd notice, I think people have already noticed, the chat box is now already accessible for your questions. As always, I would like to remind everyone that the chat box will be used only for asking your questions. Please do refrain from answering questions on behalf of our speakers. Now, let's leave that to our speakers. So now, as always, when we are asking questions, please make sure to indicate your name and your institutional affiliation. Yeah. So there. Do we have any questions so far? Just please type them down. So here, I think we have one already. So I think this question could be addressed to, I think, Dr. Wang, but also to any of our speakers. And that is regarding that since the Belt and Road Initiative, as we've been discussing, is usually concerned mostly with a lot of infrastructure projects, and I guess with our current context, will China, or is China actually investing as well in the healthcare systems of Belt and Road countries? No. So with this, I guess you are talking about healthcare facilities, but also regarding skills development for medical staff and whatnot. Okay. So can any of our any of our speakers, any willing takers?
Hi, yes, I can take this question. So actually, there's one interesting thing that emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So China has actually been seeking to bolster international image by taking the lead in providing both medical equipment and gear to the most vulnerable populations in need of the medical equipment. And this is what they deem to be the Health Silk Road, or Jiankang. Jiankang Suzhou Chilu, which is an extension of Beijing's Belt and Road, which was first established in 2017 in order to increase awareness of public health policy issues located along China's New Silk Road. So currently, I think China had contributed a staggering 10.3 million face masks to Germany, and also they also delivered 110,000 medical masks and 776 protective suits to Spain. So basically, China also chartered goodwill flights during the early stages of the pandemic to the Philippines in order to hasten the delivery of protective equipment and PPE. Philippine frontline workers have also lauded the quality of these materials. Some people were saying it's very soft, it's very cool. So in efforts to lead the handling of a global pandemic, China has deployed a lot of medical teams to not only Europe and the Philippines, but also Africa as well. And I think the private sector has stepped in. I believe Jack Ma of the Alibaba Foundation was able to dispense disposable protective clothing and forehead thermometers and protective gloves. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is, above all, President Xi Jinping capitalized on this outbreak as an appropriate time to strengthen bilateral relationships between countries. And he has also made high-level calls to heads of states, such as the Nepali president, Bidya Devi, in order to enhance communication during this global pandemic. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessa. Um, Dr. Wang, do you have any thoughts on this? If China is actually investing as well, or having BRI projects that's more geared towards health and the medical system?
Okay. Oh, actually, I guess, but when we mentioned the medical in Africa from China, but actually it consists of at least two parts. One is medical aid, but as you know, but China government is always dispatch the medical aid team to Africa. Until now, it has about 58 years, the history of the 58 years. And but currently, the Chinese government still dispatched the medical aid team to at least 45 Africa countries. So, but when we mentioned the medical, but the first one is aid. But you know, it's not easy to get benefits, or I can say get a profit from the healthy system, especially in Africa. But you know, African countries always has a very weak the public health system. But although we can say Africa has the population account for about the 16% of the total of the world population, but we can say the public finance in health, the health system is accounted for only 1% of the total amount in the world. So it's public, the health system is very weak. If we just talk about the investment, I guess it's not so very difficult. Just now, the Dr. Lopez actually gave a very great answer to these questions. But especially in this COVID-19 situation, the Chinese government and the Chinese the foundation, the private, the very huge, yeah, and very huge the medical emergency aid to the to many African countries. For example, Dr. Lopez mentioned the Alibaba Foundation, Marine Foundation, and it's quite. The second, actually, just to my the personal experience in Africa, but indeed, I saw some investment project in medical system from China, but it's not so big. But it's just some small clinic or small hospital and or the very small factories to produce very simple very simple medicines. For example, in DR Congo, you know that in DR Congo there are some of the Chinese the medical manufacturers, but you know, just for in DR Congo, it has no any we can say the ability to produce medicine, even for the injection, for injection liquid. But just for DR Congo, the biggest medical investor, not from China, and actually, but from India, It's, you know, but India has a very strong ability to produce medicals. It's quite different. So it's my answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wang. Okay, I think we have another question here for Dr. Wang. In one of your slides, you cited a state council guidance of 2017 encouraging investment in infrastructure, but discouraging financing. So how would you reconcile this with the financial constraints of African countries? This is from Lucio Pitlo from PAX. Dr. Wang, are you there?
Sorry, I'm here. Okay, I can share this this picture. Sorry, one moment.
Sure.
So, okay, you got it.
There, yes.
Yeah, sure. So just now I said that this document, the Chinese State Council's document is very important. But please notice, definitely Chinese government always encourage the infrastructure. It's no, okay, sorry, no problem. But when we mention the financing implement, it's not means Chinese government always constrained the credit. It's quite different. It's constrained the some of the we can say always we always mentioned that when we mention the financing platform, especially it's not from a Chinese official bank or the state-owned bank. It means it's just the Chinese companies always set up the so-called financing payment to client finance from the market, and he always take a very huge financial risks. But so it's quite different. This gentleman mentioned the so-called the reconciliations problem. It's a different problem. It just means Chinese government just encourage Chinese companies to invest abroad, especially in Africa, for construction and the manufacturing, not for the finance sector, especially the private owned finance sector is not encouraged by China government. If the African countries or other developing countries need loan, need financing, the Chinese government and Chinese official bank always wish to provide the loan or other financial supporting with the very provincial rates. Is my answer. Thank you.
Okay. And then thank you, Dr. Wang. I think there's another question for you regarding the Congo model, which you were able to present earlier. So I think the question is if the Congo model is something that can be, is this model unique or something that is used extensively under the BRI framework? So, and can you expound on how this model is negotiated on or decided on, and which parties have the most control over the finalization of deals and negotiations?
Okay. Okay, thank you for this question. But I share this slide. Okay, you got it? Did you got it?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Did you get the
Dr.
slides? Yeah, okay. I can give more explanation for this DR Congo model, the Congo model. But you know, as you know, we always know the so-called Angola model, but it's quite a different Angola model. just for in Angola model, it means the Chinese bank, for example, the Exim Bank or the developing bank, the developing bank always provided loan directly from Chinese bank to the local government. And this local Africa government always provide loan to Chinese contractors or other companies. But it always happens some very serious problem is corruption. Actually, Angola now always happens this corruption. It's very, very seriously. But actually, I always I did field work in Angola. But until now, I keep in close the touch with the Chinese company in Angola. They always complain Angola government is so corrupt. They always get loan from Chinese government. And when they dispatch this loan to Chinese companies, they always need a bribe, ask for bribe. So it's corrupt. So the DR Congo model, the Congo model is quite different in Angola. It means actually the Exim Bank never provided loan to government. It's just a private loan. Okay, let me see. Actually, private loan to Chinese companies, Chinese contractor, and just the private contractor to build the infrastructure. But how to repay loan to Chinese bank? It means this contractor always set up mining companies. This is why I mentioned CRE just now. I see this joint venture and it's the biggest share is the CREC. You know, CREC is one of the biggest contractor in the world. But the mining companies, the mining parts, it's a very small the part of these companies. But just in this Congo model, in some Congo model, the CREC takes project for infrastructure, and meanwhile, CREC set up a joint venture, this Sicomin, and just it means that CREC get a loan from Simbank and to set up, meanwhile, on the one side to construct the build for DR Congo, on the other side to set up joint venture with the DR Congo government and get revenge from the mining project and provide the tax and other revenue to DR Congo government, and the other side to repay the Exim Bank. But just now the question is very good, but you ask us how to negotiate. But actually this is case by case, just for this DR Congo model. But actually you please notice it's quite different. This deal, it was not signed by DR Congo government with the Chinese government. It's Congo government with the Chinese consortium. So, but actually, the Chinese companies always wish to copy this model in DR Congo or in other African countries, but it's not so easy. Although this loan, but this deal was when this deal was signed, the government with the Chinese company, the companies, it means the government, the local government always take a very little risks, but because it means this deal is unnecessary to provide the we can say the sovereign guarantee to this contract. It means you always take a very little risk for local government, and but so this is the problem. It always means you always take much more risks for Chinese companies. So although some Chinese companies wish to sign more contract with the local government, but one side, the only very few Chinese SOE, that means the giant companies, they can take this very high risks. And the second, just now I said, in African countries, there is always very strong economic nationalism, especially in the natural resource.
no matter Chinese companies or Chinese bank can provide the how much loan, the how much projects in African countries, and as soon as with relations with the natural resource, they always some the voice against such as contract, because they always say, oh, Chinese coming, Chinese always grab our natural resource. So just for this model, although it's a very benefits in from the economic viewpoint, but they always very take the very high financial risks and the political risks, but it's not so easy to expand in Africa. This is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I think we have a lot of follow-up questions regarding this particular model. Wait. Okay, so we have here regarding the mining for infrastructure deal seems to be sensible for cash-deficient countries keen to develop their infrastructure. For mineral-rich and commodity exporters with weak infrastructure, this arrangement looks appealing. So what key lessons from this model can you share? And will you say that the DRC case is a good example of this model? And is it being applied elsewhere, at least in Africa?
Sorry.
Yes, Dr. Wang, regarding... Yeah.
Sorry, what's the question?
The question is on what are the key lessons which we can take from this DRC model, and is it also being applied outside of the Democratic Republic of Congo, so maybe around Africa?
So the question is about this DR Congo model.
Yes.
If this model can expand to other African countries, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So actually, just for this model, but the Chinese company, I can say, frankly, I can say CREC and the other the shareholder of this settlement wish to expand to the other African countries, but even to in the other parts in DR Congo. But 5 years ago, when I visit a governor of the South Kivu in DR Congo, the governor said actually they wish the DR Congo model could be expanded to the whole country. But just now I mentioned DR Congo in the badly need of infrastructure construction, but they have no money. But they have, but DR Congo is rich of the natural resources. They wish to do the deal, the mineral for infrastructure. But meanwhile, I visit the scholars and the students in the local university. Some scholar and the university and explained this the attitude against this deal, because just now as the reason is they always say, oh, and the Chinese, when Chinese come here, they grab our natural resource and they never respect the human rights. They never protect the workers' rights, and they always, as you know, any project, especially the mining, the exploration project, are always dangerous for the environment, the protection. But when I forward this word to the governor was very angry. But the governor said, and no matter what the scholar and the student say, but please notice our country is very poor. We have no money. If we cannot get investment from China, from a loan, we cannot get a loan from the Chinese bank, how can we get financing? Western countries, including the European country and and the USA, they never invest in Africa. Please notice that until just now I mentioned that now the trade with Africa is just account for the about the 4% of Chinese total trade. But please notice the trade between USA and Africa is only accounted for less than 1% of USA foreign aid. And the investment from Western countries has been decreasing in the past 20 years. Just now I mentioned that 20 years ago, the USA contractor could account for about the 1/4 of the Africa international contractor market, but now it's about only 4%. It means without China, these African countries cannot get any enough financing. But meanwhile, just now I said, the nationalism and the influence from Western media is very strong in Africa. So I guess maybe the key obstacle is not from economic, it's just from the political and the social side. Is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. So I think we could move to other questions. I think there's a question here regarding the reality that, of course, there are a lot of Belt and Road projects around Africa and of course around the world. But we also hear a lot about project cancellations or renegotiations, right? So I think this is a question that is addressed to all of our panelists. Is there actually a country that prematurely canceled its contract under the BRI? Okay, and for some reasons, and I guess we could push that further into what are the usual reasons as to why countries actually cancel or renegotiate. No, maybe we could start with Dr. Garcia. I think Dr. Wang has been answering quite extensively recently.
Sorry, the question was about
The
cancellation.
cancellation of a BRI contract. So, like, are there countries or like, is there a country that prematurely canceled them, even prior to like finalizing things? And I guess if we were to somehow push this further, is what are the usual reasons why countries cancel or, in a lighter tone, renegotiate BRI terms?
Right. Actually, EG, I don't have the data for that right now, but I think what calls into question, I mean, the question could be answered as well from what happened in 2004 during the GMA administration about the ZTE deal. And there was a question I saw from Dr. Tina Clemente about corruption. And this also ties back to the perceptions. Why, I mean, there are many, perhaps if I could just offer two reasons why there are potential cancellations of the project. One would be the potential costs for electoral success at the domestic level. And you've seen that in many different cases. I think there are some case studies from Africa as well. In the Philippines, of course, you had this huge scandal. So that's one reason, especially in democratic countries, whether or not it's a maybe semi-democratic, semi-authoritarian country. The risk of electoral punishment or political punishment from domestic publics is real. So that's maybe one reason. The other reason would be at the elite level. Of course, there are a lot. These are the Belt and Road Initiative is, as Alessandra mentioned earlier, there are a lot of government to government contracts instead of just private sector to government or private to private contracts. I feel it might be about the economic models or the business model that source to Dr. Wang I usually is the agreement of how the fine print is sort of written at the domestic level between elites But I feel that, you know, from my perspective, there's a risk of electoral punishment. Especially there's a huge opposition against China, especially in fragmented, perhaps more fragmented political systems. So that might be a consideration for why there are cancellation. But maybe the other speakers could have a more maybe more perspectives in this.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Alessa?
Yes, I'd like to chime in on what Dr. Garcia mentioned. He offered a great explanation as to why some loans are either renegotiated or canceled. So actually, this is more relevant news. SCMP, or South China Morning Post, published that Australia actually passed a foreign relations law which allows the government to cancel international agreements made by universities and state governments if they were deemed to have a negative impact on foreign policy. And so what happened recently was that Foreign Minister Marise Payne of Australia, when she was reviewing the deals that she made with other bilateral deals that she made, she decided to cancel 4 deals, including 2 deals that the state of Victoria had negotiated with China in both 2018 and 2019. Because she said that they were inconsistent with Australia's foreign policy, and she deemed that to be very adverse to foreign policy. And so another way that we look at the scheme of negotiating because of governments. I think it's also important to look at on policy derivatives, and these are like some of the reasons why some deals are canceled and some deals are continued.
Okay. Thank you, Alessa. Dr. Wang, do you have any thoughts about this cancellation of BRI projects?
No, I don't need any more idea on this question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then we have a question here for Dr. Garcia. You mentioned earlier that the BRI is part of China's reassurance of cooperation with other countries. However, there are, of course, countries as well whose general populations have a negative perception about China or about these BRI projects. So are there actually measures that China is taking or might take or should take to ease such negative perceptions?
There are a lot of steps actually China seems to be doing. It remains at the government to government or elite to elite level. Of course, we don't know what exactly goes on in the sort of the negotiations among elites. It's very because it's very opaque. You know, it's very unclear and vague rather, and I think that was the intention as well. But I think that although I don't have the data for this, there some research that looks at the pattern of Chinese priorities in terms of who they would want the BRI to be recipients of. And there are a lot of, it's either the data says that China focuses on those who might have more authoritarian leanings rather than more democratic systems. Although this has to be corroborated by data and more research has to be done here, you know, there's some studies who've already sort of shared that kind of initial hypothesis. So my answer to that question is primarily the public diplomacy of China is focused on elites, on policy elites. For the mass publics, I don't think they're doing a good job, or maybe I'm not sure if they're doing a lot in that area also. So that's my answer to that question.
No,
Maybe
okay.
other speakers would have a better idea.
Okay. Do our other speakers have any thoughts on this matter?
I have no further comment.
Okay. Okay. And then we have a question here um, for Alessa. So for the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway project, was Ethiopia able to get Chinese investment in both the railway and industrial parks along the route? And also, was Nigeria unable to negotiate the same deal, hence the lesser impact of the Lagos-Ibadan line thus far? Um, and I think it's a series of questions. So can we start with those two?
Sure. So if I may, I will share my screen again. Wait, 1 second. Okay. So I'll just start by saying that it wasn't regarding the renegotiation of deals or said financing. That's why some projects fell short and others succeeded. In the Lagos-Ibadan line, our second tier line article really looked at the Apapa freight terminus and whether it's able to connect this freight terminus and streamline the process of export and imports along the rail line. What we noticed was there wasn't a connection between Tintan Island and the freight terminus. Therefore, a lot of the exports, or Nigeria wasn't allowed to, it didn't help Nigeria veer away from its export of a single commodity or oil. And so that's why we called into question the potential developmental impacts for positive growth in the case of Nigeria. In the case of the Addis Ababa Djibouti standard gauge railway, I have the data here. So I think in terms of financing, it was Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and China Exim Bank, as well as China Development Bank, who provided $3.3 billion in funding. And then the total cost would be $4.5 billion, which was 30% more than anticipated. However, our group concluded that this was a positive impact to the economy of Djibouti because the infrastructure connectivity between railways and industrial parks were very close as opposed to that of the Lagos-Ibadan railways. And then also 95% of Ethiopia's trade passes through this, and the railway was really able to cut travel time from 3 days to 12 hours. So therefore, exports and imports.
Okay. Thank you, Alessa, for that response. So I think we have a question here for Dr. Wang. So Dr. Wang, earlier during your presentation, you were mentioning on how when we look at the figures, Africa as a continent doesn't really account as largely when we compare it, say, to Asia. So if Africa is not that important to China, then why does China continue to very aggressively invest in it anyway?
Oh, okay. I know this. This question is very interesting, but maybe I have not exact the presentation. Please share. Please have these slides. Did you get it? This slide?
Yes, Dr. Wang.
Okay. Please notice. And just why I said Africa is not so important to China, but we have to see these questions from the two sides. Just for the share, for example, from first of all, just from trade between China, and the fact is that the trade between Africa is just account for about you see now only 4% of Chinese free trade, but another notice. In the past 20 years, the trade between China and Africa is increasing in the very high annual rates. So these two facts is not so conflicts. just because China now is a very huge economy and Africa is not. So we can say that just for in the angle of the trade, the share of China, but if from an angle of Africa, China is very huge and very big to Africa. So just with I guess with the trade with China, Africa can get much more the products very low price. And meanwhile, but Africa always can export its products. But I guess maybe many people always think China always gets the very large surplus from Africa. It's not true. Actually, the trade between China and Africa, we can say it's a balance. In this year, in some year, maybe China always get the surplus, but in other years, Africa can get the surplus. It always change. The second, please notice, just the FDI, just not I said. Africa is only account of Chinese out of the total FDI, only 2% or sometimes 10 years ago, it's about the 10%, but it's very strange. But generally, always 2% or 4%. In this, we can say about the Chinese FDI, in Asia, you count about 80% or 60%. And the second is Latin America or Europe, sometimes North America. Africa account a very little share, very small share. This is, but this is just from the angle of China. But actually, if from Africa, China is a financial resource in the world. Just now I mentioned, actually, Western countries always decrease investment in Africa. So the same, just now I said, but from the angle of the China, Africa is never account for the big share. But from the angle of Africa, China is always account a very big share. It's quite different, but it's a fact. And a second, that's not I said, this contract is in the infrastructure project. But you can understand. As an developing country, Africa always badly need the investment funding, and always bad need the capital to build infrastructure. But no other foreign country can build this infrastructure, and because they always cannot provide enough funding. But you know, for most of African countries, it's very difficult to get enough funding from the international society. Just for international aid, we can say international development aid, the funding is very small. If just from the business, the funding for the business market, but most of African countries, they always have the very high risks. They cannot get funding from the business market. Under this condition, Chinese government or the Chinese bank always provide the very huge loan or investment in African countries. It means the Chinese always take very high risks for Africa. So when we say Africa is not so important to China. We just mentioned the fact from the trade and the investment. But if when we talk about the infrastructure project, actually it's very, very important for China and for Africa. So we have, but this word has, we can say, has a very rich meaning. We have it never means that China always pay less attention Africa. It's not true. But actually, Africa definitely is important to China. But it's up to what's the angle on the topic we are talking about. Thank you. My question.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. So of course, we are unfortunately running out of time. So I think I will just end with one last question, which I would like hopefully all of our speakers to comment, right? So this particular question kind of frames not necessarily just on Africa, but on the Belt and Road as a whole. And it is a response to the notion that when we look at the Belt and Road Initiative, it really aims to connect countries towards China, whether it's through the infrastructure projects or the other efforts of the Belt and Road. And because of that, there's this question, are countries really benefiting from it, or is China getting the lion's share, if you would, of the Belt and Road Initiative? Okay, so any of our speakers who would like to start?
So this is actually such a big point of concern. Well, the issue of whether China is a revisionist power seeking to remake the world order, or whether it's playing by the rules of multilateralism. So this is particularly for me a point of concern, because when we look at China's lending to 52 countries, that accounts for around 102 million US dollars. So what I want to tell you guys is that debt trap diplomacy, as BRI propagandists or critics call it, is not something new. So for example, in the novel Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, the novel references how economic hitman in the US convinced leaders of emerging economies to accept loans for construction projects and engineering projects to be contracted to US companies. And then these loans provided access to emerging economies, enabling local elites of the said country to flourish while opening up the country's natural resources to the US. Therefore, it could be argued that China may be taking notes from the US in that sense. So my sense is that I think that the idea of economic growth benefits all needs to be further assessed, because as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, infrastructure implementation plan, political will of recipient countries, and other forms of organizations and or the private sector. Thank you.
Anyone else? Other speakers, please? Your thoughts on this matter?
Maybe I could jump off also from what Alessa said. It really depends on what lens you're looking at. In international relations, of course, you have this whole discussion about relative gains versus absolute gains. And I feel the question is whether China is getting more only from perspective relative. I feel that if we are countries and we look at it from the perspective of absolute gains, where all countries gain, I guess it's fine. This discussion should not be a huge discussion, sort of going to the Marxist, world systems theory discussion as well. So if you look at more liberal perspectives, they won't look at the relative gains perspective. What they'd look at is what are the real and absolute gains that were gained, and whether or not that sort of trickled down to many areas in the world. And I feel that that's, if you look at it from that perspective, China definitely has been helping countries a lot. And as case studies have shown, that's the case, right? Whether the help of China in itself intrinsically is bad, I think that was the discussion earlier, is not, right? The effectiveness of the BRI in domestic contexts will also have to be, cast in the backdrop of what are these countries' economic structures and political structures. So, I mean, my answer is it could be both. I mean, you could look at it from the perspective of China getting more, but also from the perspective that, we should just be happy that we get a lot of these things. Of course, we don't lower our standards at the same time, but what we're saying is there are real economic benefits to the Belt and Road Initiative to other countries.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Garcia, and of course, Dr. Wang, your thoughts on this question.
So actually, today I speak too much, so now time's up. Actually, but I just wish to add up the 2 points. One is just now is one gentleman asked mentioned is 1 point is very important. So Africa it's a continent. This continent, including the 54 countries, or we can say the 56 countries actually, in fact. And so you cannot compare the whole continent to the one country, and or even it's very difficult to compare this African country to other African country. So this is why the research on the Africa is it's interesting, but because you always can get a very interesting funding. So the first point. The second, not that we noticed that it's very difficult to compare this African country to other African country. How can you compare Africa to Philippines? This is why I said actually non-exempt license from a country to Philippines. But just now I mentioned the Philippines and or you can see the Asia is quite different to China with Africa. Please trust me. As a neighbor, Asia countries, especially ASEAN countries, is much more important to China. But I guess maybe many people never know. Actually, a majority of natural resource Chinese import from the other country. The biggest resource, not from Africa, not from Latin America, but from Asia, ASEAN country, including the core, including the very important natural countries. So never worry about so-called lessons. So, but actually, I trust that China will always keep very important the economic relations with Asian countries, especially ASEAN countries. It's my final speaking. Thank you for all of my colleagues. Thank you for all of guests here. It's my great honor. Thank you. Looking forward to see you again. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Wang, for your response. So yeah, it's already 11:59. And with that, of course, I would like to thank our speakers for answering those series of questions really well. And since we are nearing the end of our brief webinar on Africa's experience with China's Belt and Road Initiative, and of course the potential lessons that we here in the Philippines can learn from it, so I would like to, of course, inform everyone that that in order to help PACS improve our future events, we will be sending out a evaluation form, which we hope you would accomplish. Okay. And so with that, again, my name is E.G. Dizon, and on behalf of the Philippine Associations for Chinese Studies, I would like to thank our speakers, of course, for taking the time to share their thoughts and their ideas about this on our topic today, and of course to everyone here who came and participated in today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you again in our future events, so please stay tuned for future announcements from PACS. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and so I hope that everyone please do take care and have a nice day and have a nice lunch by extension. Okay, thank you. Thank you again, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.